The following story you are about to listen to is from a competition known as an OCT, or an Original Character Tournament. In essence, it is a project where you make a character and try to write a compelling entry against other people, pitting your characters against them in a conflict. As such, this story is going to have some bits of missing context, as the other characters represented have entire backstories to themselves that may not be fully explained due to time constraints. Also, there will likely be many grammatical errors. I do apologize and give you some forewarning. The characters of the Godeater, the Crossroads, Saki, Tenki, Miss X, and the location of the Crossroads all belong to Vashley and the Summer League's organizers. I hope you enjoy this entry. Bloopers at the end.
Summer League's Audition, Chapter 4.
Where the hell am I?
Nalagram stood on the side of a crowded street absolutely filled with people, casually milling towards what appeared to be a large arena. Based off of the tiling of the rooftops and the little pointed flare the dark tiles made, Nalagram could deduce that he had no ass-blasting idea as to where in the hell he wound up. So his next choice of action was to listen and see if he could pick up context clues. It was a venture that failed nearly as it began, as it was plain that nobody spoke the same language.
Well, that's a problem,
he grunted irritably as he rummaged around in his cloak for a handful of somethings. One of those somethings came in the form of a small, rolled-up tube about the length of his finger that definitely had a funk to it. Part of his special stash that he kept for emergencies. Or Tuesdays. It might have been Tuesday. He forgot. The other something was a small black sphere that Nalagram held between his thumb and index finger. It had been attached to a chain that dangled freely from his neck. It left a small layer of soot wherever his skin made contact. In his own way, he was probing to see if he was capable of using magic here. He pictured the sphere as a sort of tuning fork that he had channeled a bit of his soul into. It let out an unheard and unseen resonation that reached out into the world at large. The magic he had been looking for tapped back, and heat could be felt emanating from the little black ball as a spark caught. A spark turned into a flame between his fingers, a flame that he used to light the thinking grass that sat between his teeth. The smell was immediate and encompassing, especially after he took a long drag and released it freely into the air, where a number of people who had been waiting in line, and a handful of locals on the side selling things to the poor idiots, began to wrinkle their noses and drop what sounded like expletives. One of the people in line, a tall man wearing an almost gaudy amount of white and purple, strolled up with a flowing cape from the back of the line with all the flair of a showman. He was also speaking a language Nalagram didn't understand, so he had an excuse when he didn't bother listening. The man gave a flick of his dark hair, purple highlights flying, and he continued to speak. From the general vibe that Nalagram was picking up, it seemed he was trying to peacefully tell him to be considerate or some crap. He couldn't tell, he didn't really know the guy. He was going on, though. And on. And on. Nalagram decided to test his usual method for universal communication in the form of a prominent middle finger that rose from the folds of his cloak. At first, the motion went unnoticed. Apparently, this guy tended to talk a lot. Nalagram could respect it. He too liked the sound of his own voice, but once eyes were brought to the motion, the mood changed. His greeter's brows furrowed and darkened, and his body language began to shift from cordial to arms being crossed. Nalagram noted that he saw others staring with a disapproving air to them. Alright, he was getting somewhere now. As the dead air continued to hold, he took a long drag from the inciting incident in his mouth, and he had to fight back a cough as smoke billowed into his lungs. There was a grunt behind him, the stern and disapproving grunt of authority. Good. He turned around and looked up. Standing just behind was a guard who was dressed simply in red and black. He held a staff in his hands as though he knew how to use it, and his eyes were fixated on the scene in front of him. He spoke, though Nalagram still had no clue what he was saying. It was a question, though, likely asking what the issue was. From behind, he heard the guy start yammering on and on and on again, still in that different language. The guard seemed to understand this guy. It appeared as though an effect was going on here that he wasn't privy to, which was all the data Nalagram needed for the time being. He continued to hold his breath and look around as the guard was distracted by the dude in white. A flick of silver on a nearby rooftop caught Nalagram's attention. With the hood, it made it easy to stare without being noticed, and he did so greedily. Behind the guard was the shape of a silver fox that stared with an all-too-knowing look in its eye. Ordinarily, Nalagram would assume it to be a curious animal, but he could tell that its attention was on him. Hell, he could almost swear they were almost making eye contact with him. It wasn't what he was hoping for, but something had found the beacon he had sent out. The deep frown on his face hissed away like the sulfur on a match. In its place was a smirk that showed just the barest hint of sharpened teeth. A cough erupted from the white noise. It seemed like Dillhole was finally trying to get his attention. Nalgrom drew his focus back to the guard, who was still disapprovingly frowning at him. Well, more specifically frowning at Nalagrom's middle finger, which had not gone down the entire time he was spacing out. There was an expectant look on the guard's face. The annoyed type of expectant that said, "Are we gonna have a problem here?" Nalgrom opened his mouth to speak, and a plume of the foul-smelling smoke billowed out and directly into the guard's rapidly reddening face. It wasn't an undeserved ass-beating. Many of Nalagrom's ass-beatings were usually something that he had coming, though perhaps tossing him to the garbage in a dank alleyway was a bit much. But sometimes that's the only place you gotta end up to get anywhere. Still, he'd had worse in his life. The guards here were temperamental, but not beyond the point of anything reasonable. So, with the situation of being a stranger in a strange land, he did the only thing he could think of in the situation. He went searching for the lost treasures of the world. Based off of the the deep frown on his face hissed away like the sulfur. The deep frown on his face.
Nalgrom stood on the side of the street where there were a bunch of people fucking off like a bunch of diddle.